Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on school-based programs to reduce bullying and victimization. We'll be discussing the evidence from a systematic review on this topic, as well as the implications of these findings for public health practice. My name is Robyn Traynor, and I'm the research coordinator with Health Evidence. Joining me today on the technical side of things is Yaso Garinathan, and she is the Health Evidence team member that has been coordinating this webinar series and will be helping to answer any questions that you type in the Q&A window on your screen today. So welcome, everyone. I want to first acknowledge one of our funding partners. We were successful in an application to Knowledge Translation Canada for a small pilot project in which we proposed to conduct a number of webinars on various public health topics and evaluate different ways of presenting this evidence across Canada. So today's webinar on the evidence of school-based anti-bullying programs is part of this webinar series funded by KT Canada. A few housekeeping things to note just before we get started. If you have any questions or comments at any point throughout the discussion today, please post them in the Q&A window on the bottom right of your screen. Make sure that you send those questions to all participants, which should be an option on the drop-down menu in that window. This way, both Yaso and I should be able to see all of your questions, and we can ensure that none of them get missed. And I invite you to post a question or a comment at any point throughout this presentation. We recommend using a wired internet connection versus wireless if you can to improve the connection. But if you are having any connection issues, please contact the helpline listed on your screen, and the WebEx tech support will be able to help you get sorted out. If you're having any audio issues, be sure to check the volume control both on your computer and in the drop-down menu at the top of your screen if you go to Communicate and Test Audio. If at any time you can't hear me or if you want me to repeat something, just type a comment in that Q&A window and I'll address it when I see it. So here is the Health Evidence team. Putting these webinars together is really a whole team effort, from first writing the evidence summary of the review to then putting the slides together and coordinating the various logistics. So Maureen Dobbins is our scientific director. Kara DeCorby is the managing director, as well as one of our knowledge brokers, along with Lori Greco. Heather Husson is our project manager, and Kelly Graham, Stephanie Workentine, and Matt Edmonds are a few of our research assistants. So now that you've met the team, let me talk a little bit about what we do at Health Evidence, for those who may not be familiar with our work. Our goal is to help the public health workforce and policymakers search for, interpret, and apply research evidence to their local context. So we began with the launch of the healthevidence.org registry of reviews in 2005. And in 2007, we expanded this to include training and consultation services, which we continually evaluate in an ongoing program of research. So healthevidence.org is a repository of quality appraised systematic reviews and meta-analyses that evaluate the effectiveness of public health interventions. And the thinking behind creating this resource was, in making research evidence more easily accessible to public health decision makers, this would ultimately lead to evidence-informed public health across Canada and worldwide. So by having this registry, we're hoping that we are saving you time, because we know that a significant barrier to EIDM, or evidence-informed decision-making, can be the time it takes to find research evidence. So here, we've done the work for you. We've scanned multiple databases for published reviews of effectiveness, we've appraised each review for quality, and then we've put these all together in one place. All of this evidence is relevant to public health practice, and it's current, meaning that we're never more than a couple of months behind due to our ongoing screening and updating process. We try to be transparent in this process, So on our site, you can read about every step we take, including how and where we search, how we determine relevancy, and how we quality appraise and keyword each review. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we've been doing evaluation research, and part of that research is to see if our registry is indeed effective and indeed helping our target audience. So through this, we've learned that having access to research evidence is important for EIDM, but it's really only one part of the issue. Other components that support EIDM include different tools or templates. So we have created some of these resources in collaboration with public health departments that we've worked with in the past, and these are available on our site, free to download and use and modify for your specific needs. Oh, and sorry, one last thing. Finally, we try to make the registry intuitive to our users. So we relaunched our website in April of this year, and we tried to make it easier to use. So we're always looking for additional thoughts and feedback on our site, as well as those resources, those tools I mentioned. So if you ever do have any feedback, just send us a line. So this is the model that guides us in our thinking around EIDM. It was modified by the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools, and it was originally created by Brian Haynes at McMaster University. The model depicts the complex interactions between many different ways of knowing, different types of information that go into public health decision-making. So health evidence contributes to the research component of this model, or the purple bubble on the left-hand side of the screen. But this is only one component, as I've mentioned. To achieve EIDM, we also need the best available evidence from community health issues and local context, the community and the political climate, and the available public health resources. These components are then all brought together by public health expertise to make the best decision for a particular setting. So this model allows us to consider that even when using the same evidence, the same research evidence, different decisions might be made around what to do depending on the context that you're situated in. So there are many different models for EIDM and for knowledge translation, but this one speaks to us about the reality of the situations we're often faced with in public health in Canada. So then what is this process of evidence-informed decision-making? It starts with cultivating a culture of critical thinking and of inquiry, in wanting every public health practitioner at all levels to be questioning why we do what we do, and not just accepting that this is the way we've always done it, but rather how do we know what we're doing is actually achieving our intended goal? And furthermore, is there anything new out there that would better inform my practice? It then moves into how do we take a practice-based issue and turn it into a focused and searchable question. So this takes more effort than one would think, and in fact, in working through this step with public health teams, it creates good discussion because often each team member has a different idea about what the main issue is. Next, we search for the best available evidence in a time-efficient, yet also systematic way. And then we want to make sure that our decisions are being influenced by the best available evidence. So this critical appraisal step is crucial. If evidence isn't already appraised, like it is in the Health Evidence Registry as well as some other databases, then we need to do the appraisal ourselves. Following critical appraisal, we have to ask, what does all this research tell us? What are the findings, and how do I integrate this into what I know to be the reality in my particular setting? Next, if we've made a decision to change practice, how do we implement that? And how do we make sure that everyone is implementing this change? And finally, how do we promote exchange in knowledge among other public health practitioners? Across Canada, many of the same issues are being addressed and the same literature is being looked at. So perhaps with more dialogue and sharing of resources, we can hope to further promote an exchange of knowledge. So the evidence that we are presenting today comes from a review that was published in the Campbell Collaboration in 2009 by Farrington et al. This review and an evidence summary that was written for it can be found on the Health Evidence Registry. And just a note about evidence summaries. An evidence summary is a product that's created by Health Evidence that summarizes the key findings of a review and the take-home implications of these findings, and usually in a 2- or 3-page table format. So today's webinar is based on the evidence summary for this review. So why is this review topic important? Well, we know that bullying, as defined by the review authors to include physical, verbal, or psychological attack or intimidation that is intended to cause fear, distress, or harm to the victim, an imbalance of power, and repeated incidents over a prolonged period, can have negative long-term effects on self-esteem and confidence, elevating risk for mental health issues, poor academic and vocational achievement, and criminality. The Public Health Agency of Canada reports that as many as a quarter of students in grades 6 to 10 say they have been the victim of bullying once or twice in the past month, and up to 12% say at least once per week. So this issue is one of critical importance. So I'm going to pause here and ask for your input on a polling question. So you should find this question popping up on your screen in a moment on the right-hand side. And we're just asking you if you have heard of a Pico question before. So just waiting to see that polling question. And there it is. So if you could just take a moment and let us know, yes or no, have you heard of a Pico question before? Okay, so we're just closing that poll now. Okay, great. So we're almost split 50-50 of yes or no. So a Pico question, for those who don't know, is a format. Pico is a format that can be applied to articulate clear and searchable questions on a practice-based issue. So it involves defining the following elements. The first is your population of interest. The second is the intervention or the exposure. The third is a comparison group, which in some cases can just be no intervention or usual practice. The fourth is the outcome of interest. And finally, sometimes you would also define the setting that you are interested in. And then we put all of these defined elements together into one statement or one question. And that's what the Pico format is. So for this review, the Pico could be described as including the following elements. Students from kindergarten to high school. The intervention would be school-based anti-bullying programs as compared to a comparison of usual care or no intervention, with an outcome of preventing or reducing school bullying perpetration and victimization. So in this case, perpetration is the act of bullying, while victimization refers to being the victim or to being bullied. So putting these together then, the question or the objective of this review was to evaluate the effectiveness of programs designed to reduce school bullying, perpetration, and victimization. So overall, we rated this review, this is a methodologically strong review that was based on 41 program evaluations or individual studies of moderate strength. So to explain this a bit further, Health Evidence critically appraises every review that is in our registry based on a set of 10 criteria, and we give each review a score out of 10. Reviews that receive a score of 8 to 10 are considered strong. And so that's the first quality rating that I've mentioned here. The second quality rating was determined by the review authors. So every individual study that is included in a systematic review should be appraised for quality. Then the review authors have the ability to weigh the overall findings based on individual study quality. So for example, assigning more weight to the results of a well-done high-quality study than to a lower quality study. So that's why we have those two quality ratings there. And the bottom line result from this review that we'll delve into a bit further now is that school-based anti-bullying programs do indeed reduce the rates of both school bullying and victimization. So each program evaluation or individual study that was included in this systematic review involved different program and design elements and different combinations of these elements. The review authors tried to tease out to the best of their abilities, given the heterogeneity of the included studies, which elements were associated with a decrease in bullying and victimization, and which were associated with an increase. So overall, the program elements that were associated with a decrease in bullying included parent training or meetings, and the authors defined these as information nights and parent-teacher meetings where parents received information about the anti-bullying initiative taking place in their school. The second thing was disciplinary or punitive methods. And the third was the intensity or the number of hours of the program for the children. The program elements that were associated with a decrease in victimization included using anti-bullying videos, again, disciplinary methods or punitive methods, and this time the duration or the number of days of a program for the children. The only program element that was associated with an increase in victimization, and no program elements were associated with an increase in bullying, but the only one associated with an increase in victimization was working with peers, which the authors defined as the formal engagement of peers in tackling bullying through either peer mentoring or peer mediation. A final overall result, and then I'll get into discussing these results a bit more closely. A final overall result is that the design features that were associated with more effective programs were programs that targeted older children and programs in which the outcomes were measured more frequently, or they were measured more than twice per month. So as I mentioned, this review included 41 program evaluations or individual studies, and all of these studies looked at both bullying and victimization outcomes, which is why the review authors chose to report on these two outcomes. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, if you have any questions at any point throughout this discussion, please feel free to throw them down in the Q&A window, and Yasso and I will try to answer them. So looking closer then at the overall findings, let's start with what is the evidence for bullying. So school-based anti-bullying programs were shown to reduce the prevalence of bullying with an odds ratio of 1.36 and a confidence interval of 1.26 to 1.47. So this shows us that it was a significant reduction in the prevalence of bullying. The design elements that were associated with a decrease in bullying included the age of children targeted in the program, so specifically children that were older than the age of 11, and the frequency with which the outcomes were measured, specifically if outcomes were measured more than twice per month. The program elements that were independently related to bullying effect sizes included parents attending meetings to learn about the anti-bullying initiative, disciplinary or punitive methods, and the intensity for children, specifically programs that were more than 20 hours. And so by independently related, what I mean by that is that these program elements on their own were shown to affect bullying. Whereas on the next slide, I'll talk about some program elements that were also associated with a decrease in bullying, but the review authors were not able to determine whether these effects were from an individual element or the combination of elements working together in a given program. So as I said, other program elements that were associated with a decrease in bullying included playground supervision, a longer program, so having a longer duration of more than 270 days, training for teachers in general, and then more specifically training that was of a longer duration and higher intensity, so at more than 4 days and more than 10 hours, respectively. Classroom management and rules, implementing an anti-bullying policy across the entire school, hosting school conferences related to anti-bullying, providing written materials and other information to parents, and having cooperative group work involving interdisciplinary experts in order to plan and implement the program. So an important thing to note here is that the review on which this presentation is based, I believe, is over 140 pages long. But if you want some more information about these specific program elements, you can look at Table 6 in the appendix, where they describe each of the programs in more detail and provide a bit more of a definition of what they mean by some of these elements. As well, on Section 6 of the main paper, I believe it begins on page 62, you can see where they've broken down, the authors have broken down and defined some of these key features and elements of programs. So just a reference for you for future reference. So switching gears now and measuring the issue from the perspective of victimization. So overall, school-based anti-bullying programs reduce the prevalence of victimization, and this was statistically significant with an odds ratio of 1.29 and a confidence interval of 1.18 to 1.42. Specific design elements that were associated with a decrease in victimization, according to this review, included, again, the age of the child being greater than 11 years, and the frequency of the outcome measure being more than 2 times per month. The program elements independently related to victimization included using anti-bullying videos, longer duration for children, and again, using disciplinary or punitive methods. So you can see that some of these elements are a little bit repetitive in that they had positive effects for both victimization and bullying. Other program elements that were associated with a decline in victimization included parent training and meetings, cooperative group work, greater intensity and duration for teachers, and then this time simply greater intensity for children. So interestingly, the review authors found that interventions that involved work with peers, and recall what the authors described this as, is the formal engagement of peers in tackling bullying, using strategies such as peer mediation and mentoring, and usually offered by older students, was actually associated with an increase in victimization. So we actually saw a negative result when this particular program element was implemented. And again, that was just related to victimization. So then what can we say about the general implications or the take-home points from these results? The first is that school-based anti-bullying programs can indeed be effective in reducing school bullying and victimization, particularly, it seems, when firm disciplinary or punitive methods are used. To specifically target bullying, public health practitioners should consider implementing programs that are of higher intensity, so related to the number of hours, and they should include training and regular meetings for parents. To specifically target victimization, public health practitioners should consider implementing programs that are of longer duration, so with respect to the number of days, and be delivered by video, as this appears to be an effective medium for that message. However, based on the evidence of this review, and based on the evidence that peer work is associated with an increase in victimization, programs should reconsider including this element. And finally, public health should also consider how the programs are implemented. So from this review, we learned that targeting older children and measuring bullying and victimization outcomes more frequently were associated with greater effects on both bullying and victimization. So at this point, I just want to ask if there are any questions about any of the results that we've presented so far. So I'm not seeing anything, and like I said, if you do have any questions, feel free to write them down in the Q&A window. I just want to point out an important statistical caveat here, and that is that association does not imply causation. So this is just something to think about while thinking about these results. While certain program elements that I've discussed here were highly associated with reducing or increasing bullying or victimization, this doesn't necessarily mean that they caused that result, that they caused that effect. They were merely associated with a change. And unfortunately, that is just the best that the review authors were able to do based on the evidence of the individual studies that were included in the review. It's also important to note that many of these results were based on a relatively small number of studies within the review. So again, if you take a look at Table 6 in the appendix, and you can see all the different program elements that were involved in the different program evaluations or individual studies, you'll see that some of the elements were only evident in a couple of programs, whereas other program elements were much more common. So some of these results are based on a small number of studies that showed those particular program elements. So these are just two things to keep in mind when you're thinking about these results, that association does not necessarily imply causation, and that some of the results are based on a relatively small number of studies. So again, I'll open the floor to see if there are any questions. If you do have any questions following this webinar, we'll have a contact email listed at the end, and we're always interested in hearing what you think, and also we're always able to answer any questions that you have. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, I'll move on to a couple more poll questions. So you should see these come up on the right-hand side of your screen, and we're just asking for your input here. Okay, and sorry, a question has come in. And the question is, are there any examples of disciplinary methods mentioned in the article? That's a great question, Joelle. So I'm just looking at the key elements of the program, which starts on page 63 of the article. So the section that talks about disciplinary methods. So in their overall summary of the disciplinary methods, all the authors mention is that some programs emphasize punitive methods in dealing with bullying situations. One program in particular used both punitive and non-punitive methods. In half of the intervention schools that were in this program, teachers were encouraged to use strong disciplinary methods, while in the rest of the intervention schools, teachers were encouraged to deal with bullying situations in a non-punitive way. So I suppose in answer to your question then, Joelle, no specific examples are given, except to say that both punitive and non-punitive methods were employed, and it was the punitive methods that showed to have more of an effect. And I do see another question that's come in. Is the negative conclusion from just one of the articles, and do they explain why? Also an excellent question. I believe that yes, the conclusion was from one program evaluation. So that's an excellent thing to point out, and part of my caveat that some of these results are based on a smaller number of studies. The review authors don't necessarily explain why, they don't go into that detail, but just explain that it's something to consider, that there was something about having the peer mentoring and the peer mediating that actually caused an increase in the amount of victimization. And so that perhaps isn't a strategy that we should be including in these programs, or it's a strategy that we should be studying a bit further to understand why was there that negative consequence. So thank you for your questions. Are there any additional questions? If you check out the chat window, Yasso has been posting some links. Following this webinar, you can access the report and the evidence summary by going to the link that she has posted there, and that will take you to where the article is on our registry on our website. Also, following this webinar, we'll be sending you a copy of the slides and a copy of the recording as well. You can access those on our website at healthevidence.org/webinars. So at this point, maybe we'll get to those 2 poll questions that I had mentioned. So the first question is just, did you find the information from this systematic review to be helpful for you in your work? Were the results that we highlighted here useful for you? So you want to just take a moment to provide us with your thoughts on that? Okay, so we're just waiting for those results to come up now. Okay, great. So a lot of you did find that these results were useful. That's great. So then our second question is, were these results new? Was this information new to you? Any of the results from this review? And so again, we'll just give you a couple of minutes to provide your thoughts on that, and we'll tabulate the responses. Okay, great. So for some of you it was new and for some it wasn't. Excellent. So I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that this is part of a pilot project that's funded by Knowledge Translation Canada, and we're doing evaluation on different ways of conducting webinars and different mechanics in the delivery of these presentations. So at the end of this webinar, I want to invite you to complete a survey as part of this pilot evaluation. When you close your webinar window, the survey will appear, and those who wish to complete it can do so at that time. All of your responses would be kept confidential, and no information that you provide would be linked back to you personally. The survey is short. I believe it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and we would just be very appreciative of your support. So as I mentioned also at the beginning of this webinar, if you have any questions about either this webinar or about health evidence in general, this is the email address to use to contact us. We try to get back to all responses, all questions that come through that email within 1 to 2 business days. So please send us a line if you have any comments or questions. A copy of today's webinar recording as well as the slides will be available on our website following today at healthevidence.org/webinars. And really just thank you for joining us today. We've enjoyed being able to share this evidence with you. If there aren't any more questions at this point, then we can conclude this webinar. And I'll just end with maybe one last plug for our registry, that if you're interested in searching our registry of reviews, it is easy and it is free to use. We just ask that you first become a registered user, which you can do in a matter of minutes, again, just by visiting our site. And if you have any questions about that process, then again, contact us at that email address listed. So one last call in case there are any more questions. All right, so I'm not seeing any. So again, thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of YASO and the rest of the health evidence team, I wish you all an excellent afternoon. Thank you very much.